You are listening to KLRN Radio, where liberty and reason still reign.
Most writers and radio show hosts know that to connect with your fans, you need to do more than just write books or record the latest podcasts. There are many different elements that go into forming an online platform, but there are also many hidden traps. To make matters worse, solid advice on how to survive the muddy waters is scarce. In the book Hidden Traps, I talk about some of the important issues of working with an online platform, highlighting traps that could put your physical or internet security at risk or be harmful to your reputation. Are your social media posts just links with a few disjointed words, making you look like someone who can't complete a sentence? Did your new website cost you more than you anticipated? Are you leaking your personal contact details across the web without even knowing it? Then you need Hidden Traps. Hidden Traps is now available in paperback and ebook from a variety of retailers, including Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and Kobo. Visit blackwolfpublications.com for more details.
Do you need a car? Been shopping only to be turned down because of bad credit, low credit, no credit, bankruptcy, or divorce? Guess what? Today's your lucky day, because now you can buy a car, truck, or SUV, just about any vehicle. It's true. Bad credit doesn't matter. No credit doesn't matter. Bankruptcy or divorce, it just doesn't matter. As a matter of fact, your job is your ticket to your new vehicle. We're Auto Credit Express, and we've helped thousands of people just like you. Antonio H. told us, great company, got me connected, and the day I went in, I drove off in the car I wanted. 100% worth your time. Need a car? Get started now and drive off as early as today. Just text FINANCE, FINANCE, to 357-911 right now to get started. That's FINANCE, FINANCE, to 357-911. Auto financing the easy way. Text FINANCE to 357-911.
KLRN Radio has advertising rates available. We have rates to fit almost any budget. Contact us at advertising@klrnradio.com.
Everyone loves liberty. Our rights come from God, not the government. So why are you letting other people tell you what's best for your health care? Exercise your freedom with Liberty Health Share. Liberty Health Share is a community of people who voluntarily share one another's medical costs. Liberty Health Share is founded on the idea that most people truly want to help one another. Healthcare sharing allows members to do just that as a true community that supports one another in times of need. Liberty believes people should make decisions for themselves and their families. Members are able to take back the freedom to make their own decisions about their health care. Freedom from guilt or doubt about how your money is used. You have the freedom to direct your health care, not to be dictated to by bureaucrats. Stop letting others tell you what to do and join a community of like-minded people. Exercise your freedom. Join Liberty Health Share and take back the control of your health care while helping those around you. Call Liberty at 855-58-LIBERTY. Again, that's 855-58-LIBERTY for more information, or you can check them out at libertyhealthshare.org. Again, that's libertyhealthshare.org.
My son was in the Army back during Desert Storm, but even then he wanted an MBA. He looked at a dozen schools, but only one offered the online education and flexibility he needed while he was in a tent in Iraq. Grantham University. Turns out that Grantham's been delivering affordable, relevant college and advanced degrees for over 65 years. Heck, if they can deliver a quality education to a soldier in a tent overseas, think about the flexibility Grantham can offer you so you can earn your degree too. It doesn't matter how complicated or full your life is. If getting a degree is on your bucket list, you'll want to do what my son did. You'll want to call Grantham. Find out how easy it is to get started on your education so you can check that college degree off your bucket list. Call Grantham right now. 800-910-1370. That's 800-910-1370. Flexible, affordable, relevant. Call 800-910-1370.
At St. Jude, a family never sees a bill at all. It's like the world has been lifted off of your shoulders.
St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. Finding cures. Saving children. Learn more at stjude.org.
Sometimes writers feel lost, unsure why a passage may not be working. It takes another set of eyes to help us nurture our writing into full maturity. At Black Wolf Editorial Services, we strive to enable writers to develop and grow, offering manuscript critiques and line edits through a mentoring editorial style. We also offer assistance on generating a writer's bio for your websites. Black Wolf Editorial Services, nurturing your writing into maturity. For a full list of services, visit blackwolfeditorial.com.
You're listening to the Spark Radio Network, internet radio like you've never heard before. Innovation, creativity, and imagination are all said to begin with a spark. So fasten your seatbelt and take the ride of your life and listen for the spark.
Purple mountain majesties over the fruited plain. But now wait a minute, I'm talking about America, sweet.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to For Immediate Release. Thank you so much for joining us again. It is Monday, October 15th, 2018. I'm Bill O'Reilly. We are not joined tonight, at least not yet, by Liz Feld, who really carries the show. She has a very important business dinner tonight. She may be joining us later, but we do have with us the inimitable Rick Robinson is going to join us. And thank you so much, Rick, for coming on to the show and for making our show possible, for that matter. And Rick and I are going to have a terrific guest. We talked a little bit last week on the show. We were with Edward Isaac Dover from The Atlantic. He was former the White House chief of Politico, and we talked a little bit about journalism in America and how it's changed, and particularly political journalism. And this week we have a dear friend of mine that's going to join us that's been on both sides of the aisle, and I thought we could have a really interesting conversation. His name is Jerry McKinstry, and Jerry was a longtime and that's how I first met him. He was actually covering races that I was working on the campaign side. And Jerry went on to become a columnist for Newsday and a member of the Newsday editorial board. And there's Jerry right there. I was just hyping you, Jerry. Welcome to For Immediate Release. Hey, you sounded great. You sounded really big. Your head's growing. I was just finishing up saying Jerry was a Gannett political reporter for a long time, and then a columnist and member of the editorial board for Newsday, which is one of the nation's largest papers. I think it's the 8th or 9th largest paper. I do a column for them too, so I'd like to plug Newsday. And then Jerry went off and is.
Oh, Jerry, you're still there?
Yeah, I lost you for a second.
And are we all back? We're all together?
Yeah, actually, we lost you for about 30 seconds. Jerry was still here the whole time, though, so that was really weird.
Oh, I was saying great things about Jerry. So if anybody lost it, he's a great guy. And Rick and I have a list of questions for Jerry, but I just want to start with this one, Jerry. Is it true you were once Christy Brinkley's gardener?
Now talk about a curveball question. I was not expecting that one. Yes, that is true. Sort of. I was a landscaper out in Long Island, and we did a lot of very nice homes. And Bill, as you know the story, one day the Christy Brinkley comes in and needs a garden put in, and of course I'm assigned to the task. And so this is going back.
How old are you
I was
19
at this time? Years old at the time.
Yeah,
19.
Raging,
I was 19
Raging.
at the time, and I have to tell you, she was
19.
I think I developed a stutter when I did that garden. I just was so struck by her beauty. So yes, that's one heck of an intro question, Bill. Thank you.
And for those listening, I talked to Jerry a little while ago, and I said, we're going to talk about this and this and politics and that. And meanwhile, I knew I was going to open up with the curve. But first of all, was Christy Brinkley, and did you meet Billy Joel also? Were they nice to you?
I did. They were very nice. And I'll tell you this, and I tell people this really helped plants.
That is great. You know, I recently I took an Uber ride by somebody who's a really interesting guy. He was from Nepal. He was a mountain climbing guide in Nepal, and he moved here into New York, just north of the city, to Mount Kisco, New York, where I also live. And he's working to bring his family over from Nepal. And he cooks, he drives Uber, and the other thing he does is he's a landscaper for Martha Stewart, and she's one of them, and she works right beside him. Like kneeling in the gardens and doing the work, same kind of thing. Pretty cool.
Yeah, it is. It's wonderful. You get your hands dirty, and I tell you, that was one job I really loved, and it wasn't just because I got to meet people like Christy Brinkley. It was because it was outdoors. You're out in the sun, and you're really sort of cultivating people's yards and making things look great, and it was a wonderful job.
That's great. She sounded like she was great, and that he was as well. Jerry, can you walk us through your career a little bit? I'm not sure if people heard the intro so much, but you've done so much in the journalism side. I forgot to mention that you're also a journalism professor, that you have been, and I'd love just to get a kind of a chronological order of what you've done in life, so we can start from there, and then maybe discuss journalism in detail for what it's like today versus when you started. What are the challenges? What's it like to be on both sides? Because I know when we worked together, once you worked on the campaign side, and suddenly you were under fire from the journalist that you were a couple of years before. So could you walk us from the top how you got in? And could you walk us through it?
Yeah, I'll stick with the sort of, the bigger career sort of chapters of my life. I mean, I did a lot of things. You mentioned landscaping. I was a bartender. I worked in banking. I worked in government. But really the sort of, the crux of my career has been media. And I spent most of my life in journalism, which was a perfect career for me. I mean, when I was younger, I had so many interests. I loved going out and getting stories and meeting people and getting to the bottom of things. I often said that, my life in journalism, in sort of, particularly with print newspapers when they were, they used to, as everybody knows, be a lot bigger, and I seem to have a little bit more influence in our day-to-day culture. It was a lot of fun, and it was so interesting. It was sort of, I say it was my graduate degree in life, and I just opened my eyes up to what was going on in a day-to-day in communities that I covered, both, positive, negative, tragedy, government policy, scandal, you name it. It was just a wonderful career. I did that for a long, long time. And that was mostly with Gannett. And then when I made the shift to Newsday, I was hired to be an opinion writer, a member of the editorial board. And, personally, that was sort of an adjustment because I was a traditional, news reporter, meaning no opinion, get the facts, present them objectively so that the reader can make their own decision. And then when I went to Newsday, it was, I had to form opinions, and that's a totally different, art and craft, if you will, where you're really, you're not necessarily trying to make a case for everyone. You're trying to make, get to a bottom line opinion. And it was a real sort of shift in what I was doing on a day-to-day basis. But it was a very important chapter as well. And I really loved my time at Newsday because it was such a great news organization. And it was just really great journalists were working there. And I worked with wonderful people. We covered the presidential races. We covered, real policy issues, infrastructure, foreign affairs. Like it was, and it was the Newsday editorial board was made up of 10 people. And each person had their own expertise. We had, people who are, experts in the Middle East, people who are experts in the economy, people who are experts in government, and you name it. And it was such a diverse group of people and strengths. And we would just hammer out. We had to come to an agreement on an opinion every day. And we'd have really robust discussions and debates and arguments in our news meeting to get to that bottom line. So if there's a distinction, there's the traditional news hole, page one and all the other pages. And then there's the opinion page and the op-eds where you have the opinions. And I always like to distinguish. I think they both have a very important place in sort of the news ecosystem, if you will.
And Jerry, does everybody on an editorial board, do they all come through the newsroom side, or do some people go straight to editorial?
I would say, again, you can never say always. Because,
always, right.
It's not always the case, but traditionally they have come up. They have been reporters. Sometimes they actually come from outside the field. Maybe their expertise is something, that is so unique, or they, were a top aide to a governor or something like that. And then they will come in, and there's really no hope for them to be objective per se. So they really sort of come in and they have their view, and they have their opinion, and have a great insight and whatnot. So, what struck me, particularly at Newsday, and I'm sure this is at, all healthy news organizations, is you just come from a variety of different backgrounds and expertise. And really, I think what the public often doesn't get to see is what goes into making it, and it's really, as you know, Bill, honest discussion, debate, and people who disagree really sort of having an intellectual discussion. And unfortunately, I would say in sort of society right now, the way it seems, if you turn on the cable networks and whatnot, it seems to be just arguing and not much discussion. And, Bill, you and I have talked about this over the years about how it's so important for people with different views and different opinions to come together and sort of respect them and maybe come to, they may not always agree, but if they can come to a place of respect, that's a really healthy place to be.
Yeah, that's right. That was one thing that I didn't know. I was surprised when I first got into my field was how the editorial boards are broken up. I was at the New York Times on last Thursday with Mark Molinaro, who's running for governor of New York. Tomorrow we're going to be down at the New York Daily News and then at Crain's and doing those ed boards. And the way that it's broken up into those silos, I found very interesting, where you have people that really, they're truly experts at one thing and they focus their entire professional lives on studying that thing. I don't always agree with what they come up with. I think, many, many times somebody will come from, a more liberal position and I'm more of a conservative. But they do have that time to study and to get smart on things. So when you walk into an editorial board meeting, if you're an elected official looking to run for office, you better be sharp and you better be prepared, because, you're talking to people that do each topic for a living. Jerry, can you talk to when you started with Gannett, or let's not, we don't even have to put the name on one paper because it's happened to really all the papers in the country. What was the newsroom like versus the way it is now? Dramatically different, I know, in numbers, but I'll let you walk through it.
Yeah, we can talk about numbers first, then culture. And I think they both have dramatically shifted. Certainly when I was starting out in mid-career and whatnot, there was far more reporters in a newsroom. It was a very sort of robust, lively place. I think in, sort of the last, 9 or 10 years, you're down at least 30,000 jobs, across the country. And that's just sort of, print newspapers and newsrooms across the country. That has a profound effect on the quality of what you can do. When you start to lose people, and especially when you start to lose experienced people, and as the business model failed, and one of the reasons newspapers are struggling is because they don't have a viable business model. Once upon a time, and it wasn't too distant, in the past, they were vibrant. They made their money on classified ads. They made their money on, advertisements from, the J.C. Penney's, the car dealer, the Sears and Roebuck, which, as you know, today, announced it's going bankrupt. So, when you lose millions upon millions of dollars, if you're just one publication, to Craigslist in classifieds, and then you start to lose the big ads, what happened particularly in newspapers is they started to cut. The business folks, the publishers started to trim staff. They kept pushing people out every quarter. They tended to push out people who had more experience, who were the ones who could ask the tough questions, who could sit around an editorial board meeting, who they'd been around
because they were more expensive. So, just based on salaries.
Exactly, they were more expensive, and there was this real push to get younger folks in the newsroom and less expensive reporters and tech savvy. The other side of it was they had to be, really adept at, social media. They had to be able to publish on their phone. They had to be, able to do different things. But this convergence of different things that was going on led to just a massive shrinking of newspapers. And that's in the numbers. And then you can see it also in the quality. I mean, I think one of the sort of current tragedies for society, communities, and whatnot, the big newspapers, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, and, pick out any others, they're struggling, but they are still, doing well in the big stories, and they are making money and having more readers than probably they've ever had. It's those regional and local papers that have really cut back. And, when you cut back on staff and you cut back on experience, I think it's those regional readers and communities that are really affected. You don't get to find out what's going on at town hall. You don't find out what's happening in development and the zoning board meetings and the community sports leagues and that sort of thing. So, local communities are really affected by this shift. So you have that on the one hand. But if I can talk culturally, what a newsroom was like once upon a time, I mean, there were really vibrant places with reporters on the go and moving around and really interesting personalities. And I'm sure there's a lot of places that still have, elements of that. But everybody I talk to at the papers I've worked and elsewhere, they talk about it's not so much shoe leather reporting anymore, which means they're not going out with their notepad, recorder, and pen and observing what's going on.
There's no time
They're going
for it.
online.
Yeah.
There's no time for it. They're going to Twitter. They're going online. And it's about churn out the story. Quick hits. It's get it up, get the story up, which means you're most likely not getting context. You're probably, putting it up before you've done a lot of reporting. So I think it shows. I think it shows in news stories all across the country.
Yeah, I was just thinking when I went to NYU in 1983. I took a class in journalism my first year, and there was a professor there. The professor said that she used to offer $20 for anyone who could find a typo in the New York Times, and she said, "But it's not like the old days." And that was 1983. And I started looking, but because she said that, I would look for typos over the years in the Times, and once in a long while you would find one. And now they're all over the place. I mean, they're not as bad in the Times as some other publications, but they're all over the place. There's just nobody editing. I love, though, Jerry, you talk about the culture of the newsroom. Like, I know this may sound trite, but like when you started the newsroom, and Jerry, you're 50, 51? You're right around there? How old are you now?
Don't age me. I'm 40. I'm 45.
Oh, that's right. You're 45. I'm sorry. I was pushing you up there.
I just look 51.
No, you don't. 30, man. So you're 45. But when you started in the newsroom, did all the male reporters still wear ties?
No, but you did have I would say a certain sort of group in the newsroom wore ties. Now I tell you, I don't know if you remember, I always tried to wear a jacket and tie to work.
You did. That's why I asked.
Uniform.
Yep.
And I believe that you were representing the publication and the public to some extent. So you really had to.
It's a little thing, but I always love that. One of my favorite papers in the country is the Buffalo News, that just had some brutal cuts just a couple of months ago. And I think the Buffalo News was the #1 paper in America for readers per population. Took the number,
yes,
the population,
and it's a quality newspaper.
It's a dynamite paper. I think it's owned by Buffett. Has no leaning on it whatsoever, and they just have always been allowed to do their own thing. But the Buffalo News, you walk into that newsroom, and it's still the case, but it's just many fewer people there, and everybody was in a tie, and the women were dressed really nicely, and there was pride in the craft, and there was something. I mean, I always worked on the other side. I tried to work in journalism when I was 24 in the British Virgin Islands of all places, and I found I just couldn't do it. I wanted to be liked too much, and you have to ask hard questions, and often get people mad at you, But there was something about the weathered old reporters, male and female, that everybody respected. Like you talk about those elders in the newsroom, and I imagine it must have been like the kid comes in who's the copy boy, and you get hazed a little bit, and you come along and you grow a career out of it, and that seems to be all gone. I mean, is that your understanding as well?
Yeah, you make a really good point. I mean, I've always said this about the old sort of school newsrooms, and it was like a craftsmanship. You went in and you worked really hard, and you got drilled, and you were afraid of the copy editors. You were afraid of your editor because you knew that if you were not thorough, you knew that if you didn't ask all the questions, they were going to ask you, and you had to have the answer. So it was basically you learned on the job, and you learned how to ask questions. You learned how to write. You learned how to do all of that. And what has happened now, and I've talked to former colleagues, and read about this sort of phenomenon going on, and it's with a lot of experienced people pushed out, the younger folks, and I think there has been somewhat of a resurgence in journalism. I think there's a more interest in it than there was 5-10 years ago, maybe even than 3 years ago. And I don't think they are they're getting, the tutorial, if you will, the sort of tough love that we got, early on.
Right. No, I think it's right. When you were first working in journalism, how long would it take for you to work on a story? I'm not saying, I know you could write quickly, but typically, how many stories were you doing a week?
Well, it varied. I would say, we've always pushed out a lot of volume. I think it was expected that you did at least one story a day. I mean, there were times you did 3 stories, but you did that when you were really proficient at a beat, or you were, on the sort of crime beat, if you will. But you always were doing investigations, and you were always doing research, and you were fitting it in. That sort of long form, deep dive investigative piece was expected of you, and you fit it in, and you worked on it every day, and you chipped away at it. But I found in my own experience, the best investigative pieces came from being on the beat. They came because you like I mentioned before, it's that shoe leather reporting. Sources trust you. Sources see you. They give you a tip. They sort of say, hey, you know what, why don't you go over there and look under, open the door and ask a few questions. So it really solid investigative stuff came from people trusting you, seeing you, and knowing that you were going to do a good job at it. And I'm a little bit old school that way, where I really believe I loved going out and just being on the beat, sort of like a beat cop. You were a beat reporter, and you were out on the beat.
Yeah, and you wrote. I know after you left Gannett and Newsday, I know you wrote a lot of magazine pieces, and I remember you were working for weeks on them, and you would write 5,000-word pieces that were just masterful. And I remember you wrote one on the middle class challenges in certain parts of New York, and that became a really important piece. A lot of people studied that and used the data that you pulled out of that. And you can't do that. You can't do that in 2 hours.
No, and I think if I remember correctly, I had about 6 months to work on it. It was not. I had a day job, and I worked on it in my free time and on weekends. And I spent many weekends in the library researching and writing. And in the end, it was such. If I break down what I made on that piece per hour, it was probably not a whole lot, but it was so rewarding to do. And
not
just
minimum
to talk
wage
to
in New
people,
York.
I was in. Yeah, exactly. Especially not. It's far below that. But it was, again, one of my favorite parts about that is I went into living rooms of people who are struggling and people who are working 2 jobs that, or husband and wife were working. They were working hard, 3 and 4 kids and just sort of talking to different people about what it takes to get by. And, for our listeners who are not in New York, I mean, you probably heard New York's a very expensive place. And you had people who on paper were doing quite well, but just couldn't get by. And it's very kind of you to say that, Bill, but I found that piece to be personally rewarding to do.
Yeah, it was a terrific piece. Just to go after the elephant in the room for journalists today, and I got to say, as a side note, I mean it sincerely, and I think you know this, is that when you were on the reporting side, I had no idea what your politics were. It was the old Ted Koppel thing where Ted Koppel would report all night. I was shocked to find out that Ted Koppel was an ardent liberal, or Johnny Carson for that matter, who wasn't a journalist, but it didn't, it was a facts-based thing. And that was the case with you. That said, as a journalist, are you hated by everybody? Like, especially as a political journalist?
It's a good question. You're disliked by a lot of folks and you're liked by others, and then you just have to keep it in perspective. Well, some people hated me. I mean, you just don't let it, you really have to keep your North Star. My North Star when I was a journalist was truth. And there were people that I liked when I was covering that if they did wrong, I was like, you know what, I'm so disappointed in them for doing this, but I have to report it. There is no, it is, truth is the North Star, and it should be for journalists. And you keep your views to yourself. You don't lead with loaded questions or anything like that. I mean, I always believed I had to get to the bottom of the story. And I always, in a press conference or room, I had to represent the public. And I know that sounds, probably a little sort of, golly darn. But I was like, if I'm asking a politician questions, I'm asking on behalf of taxpayers. I'm asking on behalf of, people not in this room, and they have a right to know. And I always believe that. And sometimes people, politicians didn't like you for it, and sometimes they respected you, and you just had to go about and do your job and realize that, if you're here to make friends, you're in the wrong business.
Right. It's a tough business for that. But I got to say, with the more seasoned reporters, the ones that have been around, the real pros, they seem to be the ones to me that over time that take the least cheap shots. They get the young reporters always lead with the curveball, and they're looking to get the quick news, and they'll ask something off topic. You didn't do that. Do you think it's I'm curious to know, do you think that that's part of the job, is to ask the curveball and to put the interviewee off guard and try and get something that's not rehearsed? Or do you go after the substance of what they're there to talk about, even though they've rehearsed it in the mirror for 3 hours?
Well, I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, you don't like to get the rehearsed answer. I think you want to catch them. You want to get them in a real state. Because as we know, I mean, a lot of them have a lot of aides around. They have a lot of speechwriters. They have a lot of people who have poll tested everything. And you really are trying to get to the bottom of the core of what they're thinking and doing. And sometimes that means, asking a tough question. I mean, I don't believe in asking a curveball for the sake of throwing a curveball. I think you're just trying to get to the truth. And, you're not, I don't think you should be trying to embarrass them either. I mean, sometimes you see interviews on television and, they'll, particularly in presidential races or political campaigns, where they just throw, questions at a candidate out of left field.
Until they make a mistake.
Some are fair and some don't. Until they make a mistake. And that's what they're going for. The story I think they have in their head is whatever the mistake is, which would take me to a sort of, another tangent is what I think is lacking in a lot of news and political coverage is substance. I think it's a lot of it is superficial. I mean, I always say about, political reportage right now, it's politics is like the police blotter of news coverage. It's cheap, it's easy, it's sensational, and it's consumed. And sometimes in that coverage, we don't get what we really need. And that might be some policy discussions, tax questions, tax discussions, whatever it is, whatever is important to you or whatever you need, healthcare was a good debate, is a good issue because, we all need healthcare. We all utilize healthcare, but in much of those discussions, we didn't know one way or another what would be covered, what wouldn't be covered. And it really, became just a sort of political hot potato and with not a lot of substance in my view. So that's just one example.
Yeah. But also you get, it's I found from being on the other side of it is that, and I think the news side discovered this as well, is most people don't want to read in-depth things. They want to know that,
right.
So-and-so called so-and-so a bozo, and he called him, well, you think I'm bozo, you're and that's the stuff that people talk about at the water cooler, the proverbial one. And I guess it's just so tempting to do it. But Jared, I'd love to ask, So when you switched to the other side, and I know you don't do campaigns now, but I know you did for a year. We did it together. What was that like for someone who's been a political reporter for so many years and who's taught journalism to suddenly switch onto the other side where the reporters are going after you? I don't think a lot of people have done that.
No, it was a very interesting experience, and it really depended on the reporter. I mean, I can give you a couple examples, but the congressional campaign in New York that you and I worked on, where I served as a press secretary and was fielding questions. This was in 2016, and
it was a
every day.
Race. Yeah, hot race.
A hot race, national coverage, big coverage. What I'd say, big time reporters from major publications calling.
$8 million spent. Yeah.
Yeah, big money race. And we would put out policy papers and substance, and every day it seemed to come back. What's your reaction to what Donald Trump did today? Right. And I remember having a lot of frustration, with the press, where they didn't really, many of the reporters didn't really care about what we were doing or what message we were trying to get across. They were sort of just staying with the that sort of national headline of, Trump did this, so what's your response? And I think they missed a lot of, important coverage that way. Some of it was rewarding because, honestly, working with really good reporters is a wonderful thing. They're smart, they're intelligent, they ask good questions, they're curious. If they're professional, it's a pleasure to work with them. And sometimes they take a swing or two, and I think to some extent that's their job. They have to ask tough questions. If I take it a step further, then that, past that campaign, when I was working sort of on the government side, which was during an election campaign, we had some, columnists and reporters that had it in for us, and they were not trustworthy. You couldn't really talk to them. And we were at the point where we would only communicate with them via email. So we had a written record of what we said to them, because they would twist and turn and manipulate. And that was really disappointing for me, as a former journalist who took it very seriously and always felt like he gave people a fair shot, to all of a sudden not be given a fair shot by, somebody in a career that I really, the career itself that I really admired and cherished. That was disappointing. That was a tough pill for me to swallow, but it was also quite eye-opening that,
I was going to ask
media bias.
Yeah. I was going to ask if
Sorry, Bill,
I was going to ask if you saw that media bias while you were in the newsroom, or whether you really got to see it when you were on the other side.
It was, you saw some bias in the newsroom. You saw subtle bias. Bias comes in a lot of different ways, and it can be in position of the story, where it's placed, the emphasis put on it, where the quotes are put, or how it's shot down in a news meeting, or, you bring up a story idea, and the sort of collective wisdom, if you will, says, no, that's not news today. That's not important. So it can come in different ways. And when you're producing news every day, of course it sort of trickles in. And I think the danger for people in the news business is to assume they know, I think really good reporters will be open-minded and not just say they know this is what the story is, because so often you think you know what the story is, and then you start reporting, and it turns out to be totally different. So, it's important to go in with an open mind and do a heck of a lot of reporting on it.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a great deal of sense. I wanted to ask, because you had a chance, I know, to go back into journalism. You were offered a very good job for a very distinguished newspaper chain in the country, and you elected not to go into that. What was that thinking?
Oh yeah, wow! You remind me of that. So when after I went through being downsized at one of the publications, which was common. It was like this was the new norm at newspapers and news in general. It's not just newspapers; it's television and radio. honestly, at that point, I never thought that I would not be in the news business. I really sort of liked it so much. And then I was interviewing with this, pretty, major news outlet, and for a job that, when I started, that was the job I wanted. It was for a managing editor job, and the publisher kept sort of focusing on the interview about how are you going to cut the staff, and how are you going to sort of use these words, but gut the newsroom. And it just left such a poor taste in my mouth that I said, you know what, I'm going to tap out. This is not the business that I want to be in. If you believe in karma, when you get into that and start being, the sort of hatchet man, it inevitably comes back. So I had opportunities to make a shift, and I said, I'm young enough, I'm sort of nimble enough. Let me make the change. Let me adjust, and it really was a result of interviewing. And just there was so much talk of just more cuts and a focus on it, and I just didn't think that was something I wanted to be a part of.
That's got to be tough, though. I imagine, and from an outsider perspective, that being a journalist becomes your persona. Almost like a police officer is a police officer, and a medical professional is a medical person. A reporter is a reporter, and it's everybody knows that you're a reporter. You know what I mean? If there's a reporter in the room, you're at a wedding, and what do you do? I'm a reporter. And that's always interesting to people. They always want to talk about it. How hard was that to give up? I imagine it must have been rough.
Yeah, that was tough. It was definitely part of, my identity. It was something I really liked doing. And all of a sudden I wasn't doing it. I was doing something. I was still in media. I was doing public relations and media relations. But it was a shift, and it was a different side of the business. And I think this, Bill, but for years later, I was still identified as the reporter. I mean, I had gone, 2 jobs after that, and people were still calling me the reporter.
They were still sounding a message in the bar,
Yeah, exactly. It was still sort of something that people identified me with. And, it's hard, but, you just have to, the sad part is how the news business has changed, and how it's not what it once was, and how there's fewer opportunities for people. But when one door shuts, and this is cliche, another opens, and you just have to adapt. And fortunately for journalists and myself, is that you learn so much in that industry, in that business, that you can adapt. Because you're adapting every day. The great thing, the thing that I truly loved about newspapers, if I look back, was that you went in and you never knew. Like, you may have thought you knew what your day was going to be like, but something happened inevitably. And it could be, you could have been a political correspondent, but they were short on reporters, and, there's something big breaking, and you got to go out and get it. And that was the exciting part of, the news business.
I think that applies for politics as well, where every single day just is something that you never expected. Today was one of those for me, and it's at least it keeps it interesting. But can you talk? So you went out of journalism, and then you joined Harrison Edwards, which again is a really well-respected, a leading public relations and marketing firm in New York and in Nashville. What's that like? What do you do over there? I just love to hear what you're working on.
Yeah, well, you know what, we do like strategic communications. We do public relations and marketing, and we try to tell the story of our clients, and our clients sort of, cover the gamut of healthcare, college and universities, nonprofits, you name it, private businesses. We have a whole unique sector in what's called the broadband sector, and which would, I would consider that under the economic development sort of umbrella. So you're doing really interesting work and still learning a lot about, new areas of business and the economy. So there's a lot that you can continue to learn and stay sharp, if you will. But having a journalism background is very helpful, because we approach things, we think like journalists. We are trying to provide them with facts and compelling stories. And there's this thing, a lot of reporters, call us flacks, and they think we're trying to spin them, and that's not the case. We're like actually trying to provide them, with good information so that we can get some coverage and help them out with sources and that sort of thing. What we're really trying to do is convey interesting story and narratives of the people we represent. So having a journalism background is very helpful, in this public relations, media relations, and communications field. So, it's a skill that keeps on giving.
Yeah, Jerry, I think it's a great point. It's I always tell young people starting out that you need to know what a story is. And that may sound simplistic, but it's a huge advantage. And, coming out of the journalism side, you obviously get that. It took me years to figure out. I was working on the PR and politics side. I tried the journalism, but it really wasn't a match. But to know what's a story, I don't know that I can identify. I mean, they always say, dog bites man, man bites dog.
Hello?
It's, one is a story. Liz Feld. Oh, good Lord.
Oh my gosh, is this my show? Did somebody hijack?
We hijacked your show. It's Bill O'Reilly and Jerry McKinstry. Jerry hijacked your seat, and I think Rick is here
Jerry,
as well.
God bless you. You've done a lot of great things for me, but this takes the cake.
Hey, Liz, how are you?
Have you covered all the topics du jour?
I've been blowing smoke up Jerry's backside for the last 40 minutes. Yeah.
He has, but he did throw some curveballs at me, which I wasn't expecting.
I asked Jerry about his time.
Did he ask about ethics and journalism?
Landscaping for Christy Brinkley. That was one of Jerry's first jobs. So.
I did the dumbing down of For Immediate Release. Good heavens. One 45-minute lapse. And
you let the boys take over. This is crazy, crazy.
This is what happens when you take an afternoon off.
Good. Well, I just saw the breaking news that the Stormy Daniels defamation suit got thrown out. Did you cover that yet?
Oh, we haven't seen it yet. Oh, you come with breaking news. Gifts.
You come with news. All right.
What does it mean?
She's a real journalist.
Good heavens.
Liz, we were just walking through Jerry's work as a journalist, and then editorial board person, then switching sides on the political side and actually working with reporters, as a spokesman, and then being in the PR side. Just what a difference that is. I mean, what different planets?
Of course. And do you find, all kidding aside, that you're that some of the stereotypes and the biases that everybody alleges about the other side are true, or which of those transitions was hardest for you?
Well, the political side was an interesting transition because some of the, there was some bias and there was some, missing of facts or omission of facts on occasion. And, that was always a challenge. But, you had to go back every day and, and do your best to, get the facts out there. And, some days you won, some days you lost, but you had to keep coming back. And, one of the things I learned, and, to some extent I learned this in the news business as well, was that you just had to have a really thick skin, and it was best not to take anything personal. If you could not take it personally, you'd sleep better at night.
As a reporter? As a
no,
journalist?
On both sides,
On both sides,
as a journalist, but also as a communications person, I'm not doing politics right now. I do more traditional, public relations and media relations for, nonprofit clients, businesses and whatnot. And you're really trying to get their story out there and sort of, sometimes you're coaching your client to come along. Sometimes you're just really trying to get the reporter facts. One of the challenges, and I'll sort of tie this up, and Liz, what we talked about before was there's not as many reporters as there used to be, and a lot of them are covering national issues or national stories or national tweets, whatever you want to, call some of the stuff. So there's more competition for, traditional news or traditional stories and traditional profiles, and it's very competitive. It's sometimes tough to get your word out there.
Okay, I have a question for you both. Liz, I got a question for you and for Jerry. I'll start with you. Here it is. So, Elizabeth Warren showed today that she has 1/1020th, something like that. She basically has a drop of Native American blood. Does Donald Trump owe her the $1 million or not? Liz Feld. Then we'll ask Jerry.
No. because I probably have the same amount in my blood. So,
but he didn't bet you because he said, "I'll give you $1 million if you're Indian, if you have Indian blood."
Oh gosh. Then I guess he does. I didn't know
I gotta say, he's reneging. Now he's saying he'll give it if he personally administers the test, and then he said like yuck or something like that. He's
saying it's not a legit. For God's sakes. Well, I actually think that for God's sakes is that she had the test and had to prove it. For heavens, really.
Yeah, exactly. It's not a lie.
When I saw that headline, Bill, I was like, "This is nonsense. Like, this is not what we really need to know. This is
thank God I'm not a
journalist.
sensational."
I'm actually, and kidding aside, I'm shocked she did the test. Why would she stoop? I guess obviously his claims against her stuck, and mostly the claims being that she wasn't telling the truth. Never mind what the fraction of her heritage was. So she felt like she had to disprove or prove that she wasn't a liar, which is not a good place to be in for any politician.
Yeah, I'm sure she wouldn't have given up the results if there was nothing. If she was goose eggs, I think that would have been buried.
Well,
but Jerry, what do you say? What say you? $1 million or no? Rick, $1 million?
Well, I just want to interject one thing because honestly, looking at the numbers from the genetic testing, she actually has less native ancestry than most American citizens. Because if you look at the numbers, it's usually about double what she's reported as having. So, in my opinion, based on the fact that she has less than the average American anyway, I'd say Donald Trump doesn't know where the money, but
know where the money.
What do I care? Don't give it to her. Give it to me. I could use it. Just saying.
Jerry, it's up to you. What do you say? What say you?
Look, I am no expert in genetic testing whatsoever. So I'll just tell you what. When I saw the headline, I just was like, "You got to be kidding me!" Like it was a story that didn't interest me.
Is this what it's come to?
It's just what it come to.
Yeah,
exactly.
She took the bait and took the test, which I just find bizarre, especially for someone, whether we agree with her or not. I mean, she's usually a woman of substance. I don't agree with her on the policies, but this is bizarre.
Yeah, it was a little bit of bizarre. Liz, did you know that Jerry has another claim to fame now, which I just learned, that Jerry plays baseball on the same team as Ari Fleischer, the former White House press secretary for President Bush.
You did or you do now?
You do now.
We do.
Is it true?
You know what? Yeah, it's very true. You know what? So I'll tell you I'll give you the
under
long
40.
Story.
Yeah.
I wish you were the under 40.
I thought Jerry was in his 60s.
So,
yeah.
You said I was like 60 before. Thanks, Bill. I only feel 60. So a couple of years ago when I was writing a magazine piece, I did something on Ari Fleischer, and it was a wonderful interview and experience. And he started talking about baseball. And if you don't know it, he loves sports. He's just a sort of sports fanatic. Now in his post-political career, many of his clients are sports clients. So he told me, he says, I play baseball in this, men's league and I play up in Ridgefield, Connecticut. And I said, Ridgefield? I said, I live up there. And he's like, well, you should come out. And sure enough, it took me a few years. I was a little bit hesitant because I thought, maybe I hadn't played in about 30 years. I hadn't played since high school. And, I was a little bit worried. I just didn't know how it was going to play out. And then I've been playing softball, and two guys on my softball team said, why don't you come play baseball with us? And that was all I needed. Like, I just said, all right, let me play. And then, so as it turns out, yes, I play with Ari. We play, every week during the baseball season. And it's just a wonderful group of guys who come together who love baseball, who happen to be over 40. So it's a great group of guys.
Is he good? Is Ari Fleischer good?
Of course he is. He's a great ball player.
You're asking a public relations executive.
You're working on the PR side now. Exactly. And Liz,
the first day I showed up,
did a nice job in politics, in Twitter, and in it's just in television in general. He pretty much he talked about basically calls balls and strikes. I find him refreshingly objective.
Yeah, I think
he adds a perspective about media I always like watching, he has just such insider information about when he was press secretary, and he's followed it since, about little subtle media biases or maybe not so subtle media biases. And it's really fascinating to watch his Twitter feed, because he, like you said, he calls balls and strikes, and he adds a really good dynamic to the conversation.
Yeah, he's one of those seasoned voices, like, the America Lost Kratheimer, and Ari Fleischer, somebody that, you're right, you always want to get his take, because it's never what you think it might be. It's often different and thoughtful, always well considered.
Yes.
Very good stuff. I also want to ask you.
That's what we need. When we talk about, I'll just say this though before you ask the question, is that we need more thoughtful discussion. We need more sort of dialogue, and we need differing opinions to come together and talk and sort of hash through issues. That's what I think we're sort of missing. When I turn on cable TV at night, I'm so disappointed, because it just seems, so one-sided, on either end of the spectrum.
What do you think? I have a piece coming out in Newsday tomorrow about Mike Bloomberg entering or possibly entering the presidential race as a Democrat. And for listeners that are listening from around the country who may not know Bloomberg as well as we do in New York, I think it might be worth discussing for the few minutes we have. What do you guys think of him? Is there a path for him on the Democratic side? He's, Bloomberg being kind of a liberal, socially, but fiscally prudent, kind of a pragmatist, business guy. Liz, what do you think?
No. I think the answer is no. And we touched on this a little bit last week. Obviously, he's got the money to put together a ground game of getting on the ballot and things, but I don't think so. I don't think, first of all, I think his age is a factor. I don't think he's got the political skills that Trump does, to run as an outsider. He's not an outsider. It's interesting. He's obviously a successful business guy, but he's not an outsider anymore. He was the mayor of the most important city in the world. He runs a global initiative around, major policy issues. He's not fresh or new. I'm not saying I don't agree with him on some of his priorities, because I do. I think he's been talking about infrastructure for decades now. He's been talking about,
pension costs,
the environment, and all these pension costs, all these things. But I don't think he's going to get out of the starting gate. And I'd be shocked if the Democrats rewarded him with a nomination after he really has straddled every political affiliation. I don't see how they do that this year. Not when you look at the kinds of candidates who've won in the primary. I don't see the party going from. Do you, Jerry?
I think
now that I buried him,
what
do you think, Jerry?
Well, I think his only path is the Democratic Party. I don't think he can I don't think he'll run as an independent. In fact, if he ran as an independent, I think he would do more damage to the Democratic Party than he would to the Republican Party. But that said, I think you're probably right about, the establishment, may not, open the door for him. But I don't think he's dead in the water, but I think the Democratic Party would be the only path for him. But, we'll see how this plays out. I've stopped predicting. I don't predict anymore.
I think you're right, Jerry. I think that's the only place he can be. He's made clear he doesn't want to run as a spoiler, as an independent or as a third party. And I don't think there's room for him in the Republican Party. He never really was truly a Republican, but he's to some extent, for someone who's run for office and won 3 times, he's apolitical a little bit. Like ideology isn't that interesting to him. He's more of an efficiency expert, if you will. But I do think there's a path, Liz. I think because they moved California up to March 3rd, the primary moved up, and it's such an expensive
that's an interesting point.
market. It's got 11 media markets, and he may be the only one with the money at that point in the race. It could be a really early momentum booster. But you're right; he'd need to have several candidates on the far left, like Elizabeth Warren and Booker and a bunch of other ones, in order to split up the vote. But who knows? He has $51 billion. You could do a lot with that. And he's not shy about spending.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, and after he supports all these House candidates, soon they're going to owe him something. If the Democrats, if we can prove that his $50 million in this cycle really helped all these House races.
I think he's up to 100 million now. 100 million.
Is it 100? I thought it was 80. Is it 100? Yeah.
It's 80, and then 20 he gave to the Senate. So 80 for the House and 20 for the Senate. Jerry, I think we're going to start hearing music in a minute. So I just wanted to thank you, Jerry McKinstry, of Harrison Edwards for being on, and a longtime political journalist, editor, journalism professor, and a dear friend to both Liz and to me. Thank you so much for taking the time to be on. And Liz, I'm so glad you could join. Do you want to bring us out?
Jerry, hats off to you. I want to have you back on when I'm around for a lot of the conversation. So maybe what we should and do a show from up there would be a blast, and see who starts. It. I know they're already out now. Bloomberg was just in New Hampshire 2 days ago. They're already out on the trail. We're there. Kamala Harris and Booker in Iowa. Let's go. Concord or bust. Concord or bust.
Nice.
Thanks so much.
I love New Hampshire.
Yes.
Thank you, everybody.
All right.
Take care. Thanks so much.
Care.
Thanks, Billy. Bye.
Bye-bye.
He crowned that good. Yes, he did.